Colonel Dean Caswell was born in Banning, California in 1922. After completing 2 years of college, he joined the United States Marine Corps 2 weeks before the attack on Pearl Harbor. With his college experience, he was eligible for flight training and was winged as a naval aviator in December 1943. After initial training in the F-4U Corsair, Caswell was assigned to Carrier Air Wing 8-4 aboard the USS Bunker Hill, where he began carrier flight operations in 1944. Serving in the Pacific Theater as part of Task Force Group 58, Caswell and the other members of Marine Fighter Squadron 221 took on the task of crippling Japanese air power by destroying as many enemy aircraft as possible. This tour would take him through a period of devastating kamikaze attacks against the U.S. Navy near the islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Caswell flew combat air support missions to alleviate this threat and in preparation for the coming assault on Okinawa. In total, he flew over 100 of these combat missions, destroying over 25 enemy aircraft on the ground and notching 7 aerial kills, earning him the title of Ace. He accomplished these feats without ever once taking a single hit from an enemy bullet. Caswell also survived a deadly kamikaze attack against the Bunker Hill that claimed the lives of over 300 sailors and Marines. He served his country for more than 30 years, flying in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and even served as a member of the squadron, the Blue Angels. He is the recipient of the Silver Star and 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Caswell and his wife, Mary Donahue, reside in Austin, Texas. Air Command and Staff College is proud to honor Colonel Dean Caswell as an Eagle.
Well, here we are, sir. A highly decorated, jarhead, Airedale, leatherneck Marine being interviewed by a wet behind the ears, paint chip and swabby in front of a room full of zoomies from the chair force.
Are we through now?
I don't know who let this happen, but I think it's going to go well, and I'll try to not use verbose parlance because I think the Army's here too.
Would you mind repeating all of that again? I didn't hear.
But on a serious note, sir, it has been my distinct privilege to get to know you this year, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming to be honored as an Eagle this year.
Well, let me put my oar in here for a minute. I'm looking at all of you folks, the high ranks, the lower ranks, these distinguished, extinguished, whichever it was. The gentleman and the lady, I am so honored. I don't believe in my lifetime, except when I got married, am I so honored. Thank you so much for what you've given me.
Sir, in this room we have people that went to service academies to enter military service, ROTC graduates, and then officer-trained OTS grads like we met yesterday. I'd like to take you back to 1941 and ask you to tell us how you happened to join the United States Marine Corps with a little help of your cousin.
Well, I will do this if you all promise not to tell. A little background. I was the Depression boy, and I mean a real one. I saw my first ice cream cone when I was 15. At 18, I left home because it was a nice time to do that. Went to California and joined my cousin that I'd grown up with, trying to make my own way and damn near starved to death for a while. After working with Lockheed for about 9 months, my cousin, first name Carl, gave me a call. I was living in a one room with a lady and her young daughter who had rented it to me. She let me use the phone once a day. He called, he said, Dean, why don't we just do the town? You got any money? I said, Carl, I have $7, that's all. He said, well, I've got 5, let's do it. So we wound up on Broadway, to keep it short. We decided to do the town by seeing a burlesque show. We'd never seen one before. This old boy from Texas sure hadn't. And so that we'd do a good job, we stopped, not ever having had a drink before. We bought a little bottle of Four Roses bourbon. I know that most of you don't do that, but we did. So we paid 35 cents apiece, went to the burlesque show, found a place in the loft, as dark corner as we could, and we drank the booze first. We never saw the show. At 2 o'clock in the morning, some fella came up there and said, "What in the hell are you guys doing up here? The show was over at 9 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock in the morning." Out we went on the street. It was a bad time to be out there, and we felt like a train had run over us, but there was the doorway open and lighted, and a man was standing there in a dark suit with silver stripes on his arms. We'd never seen that before. We shouldn't have really talked to him. And as he was talking, another fella came up, a little bit bigger size. He had a green uniform on, and he had red stripes on his arms. Well, we walked out of there. I was a Marine, and he was a Navy man. That was a recruiting station. So 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor, I was a private in the Marine Corps, and that's how it got started. Thank goodness.
Yes, sir. After that illustrious beginning, I love it. And then soon after that, you headed off to flight training, and were soon matched with one of the most iconic airplanes in history, the F-4U. If you could tell us a little bit about your training and how you and that lovely airplane were finally matched.
Compared to some training programs that I've seen, I think we were very fortunate at that period. This was 1942. Actually, we had 9 months of flight training. Some people had shorter times than that. We had heard all about the Corsair, which was used in the latter part of Guadalcanal attack. So I was delighted when I asked to be a fighter pilot to be assigned to a fighter squadron. And that was a very interesting little jaunt, because when I walked in through the door of the flight officer, said, "Here I am. I'm Dean Caswell, a brand spanking new second lieutenant with about 125 hours of flight time." I said, "I'm reporting in for duty, sir." He said, "Well, there's an airplane right up there. Go get in it and go flying. I'm busy." No manual, no nothing. So I climbed into this long-nosed thing. I couldn't see over the front. And by the time we finished our advanced training, I had about 100 hours in the airplane. A marvelous airplane. Big, heavy, fast. And I was a young 22-year-old man, young man. Before it was over, and by the time the Korean War was over, and I flew that airplane, that type of airplane, for a while. I had 2,000 hours in that Corsair, so I liked it.
So you told me back in Austin that when aircraft selection was nearing, you weren't always assigned to the F-4U, that you were originally slated to be a dive bomber pilot?
You want that story too?
I do, yes, sir.
Well, life is full of disappointments. I won't tell you her name. One week before graduation, we got a little slip of paper that answered our requests for the type of flying we wanted to do upon graduation. I had, on several occasions during flight training, indicated my strong desire to be a fighter pilot, because I had read all about G8 and these battle aces, and some of you have read that magazine too, I guess. On graduation, I had another piece of paper that says, "You're flying dive bombers." So all my work was for nothing, it seemed like. We were at Pensacola, Florida, and the graduation ceremony was at headquarters at Pensacola. And as soon as it was over, I got my uniform on with my second lieutenant bars, and I marched down and found out where they made the assignments. And sure enough, there was a 21-year-old gal, very pretty young lady. Her job was to dole out assignments, and she told me just point blank. She said, well, I'm just filling out the quotas, that's all. That's why you got to be a dive bomber pilot. Well, I got up a date with her that night, and I told her a few things I didn't keep my promise from, but you're laughing at that. You know what happened. Anyway, I became a fighter pilot that way. How about it?
Well done, sir. So as a fighter pilot, a Marine fighter pilot, you were assigned to VMF 221, and we're going to be headed off to the Pacific shortly. So could you talk to us about VMF 221's mission? This is 1944, you're assigned to Task Force 58, and what was going on in the war at that point?
Well, I'd like to tell you that my assignment to 221 in the Corsair was to be trained in combat fighting and go to some island and sit there and be called upon to support our Marine troops in their combat and attacks on the islands. It didn't happen that way. Suddenly, after about 7 months of flight training in the Corsair, the squadron was notified you were going to be carrier-based. Well, I couldn't even spell carrier, let alone fly off of one. Suddenly we did 2 days of field carrier landing practice, went to San Diego, did that field carrier landing practicing at night, which is 50 feet off the ground. Then we were assigned to the USS Ranger, where we got 8 landings and we were qualified. And that's how they trained us to fly off of carriers. So in the Pacific, the squadron joined Task Force 58, whose primary mission was to kill all the Japanese pilots that we could, all their infrastructure, and unfortunately, a lot of people were killed too. The Corsair was the primary weapon for those Navy aircraft carriers. They carried 90 Corsair airplanes and 2 Marine squadrons and 1 Navy squadron. We fought the kamikaze. The Japanese pilots in that stage of the war, the latest strategy was to use the suicide pilot carrying a bomb to strike all the carriers that they could and any other ships they could find. And our job was to kill them all. They did a good job and we did a good job. In 9 months, the Japanese lost 4,000 pilots. We lost 2,000 pilots. It was a real tough, mean war. And then our carrier got hit by 2 kamikazes and we suffered some very serious damage. And with that, World War II was over for me. Are we ready?
Yes, sir. We're doing well. On April 28th of 1945, you were on one of these combat air patrol missions, being guided by some Fletcher-class destroyers, and it was you and 2 other Corsairs. If you could describe that mission when you found yourself head-to-head with the enemy.
All right. One of the big defenses for the task force against the kamikaze was to get warning at least 100 miles from the fleet, which would be we were at Okinawa, so that would be 100 miles north of Okinawa. And they placed their destroyers with radar equipment at that location or those locations to notify the fleet when the kamikazes were coming down. Believe it or not, their raids were as many as 400 a day. And that's pretty hard to fight against. So 4 of us were launched one day to have a combat air patrol mission over one of those radar destroyers. And they would notify us when the enemy was coming and that we were to do our best. We were ordered to 20,000 feet with the comment from the director, many, many bogies, 20 miles. And by that time, we had lost one of our pilots who had bad engine trouble and went back to the carrier. So now we're 3. We were attacked by 25 Japanese brand spanking new fighters. They were the cover for a kamikaze raid that was way down below us. My first sight was a Tony, Kawasaki 61 they called it, firing head on at me. And my wingman was hollering at me, "There's a 0 on your tail." So I had bullets flying from the back and the front. And I was such a brave pilot, I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. I got the Tony in front of me, and my wingman got the 0. And when that fight was over, I claimed 7 airplanes. My wingman claimed 6. We had movies to prove some of it. And the other fella got 3. The rest of them went home. The story didn't end there. It jumped to Korea. I was offloading some jet night fighters at Yokosuka. And this was in 1951. There was a Japanese man in charge of the crane offlifting our jet fighters from the carrier to the port, and then they would be towed to an airfield and flown to Korea. He was about my age, and we had a lull in our work. I was in charge of the airplanes being taken off the carrier. He walked over and talked to me for the very first time. He was about my age. And he said, "Do you fly those airplanes?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I was in the American-Japanese War." Interesting. And without a comment, he pulled out his wallet, pulled out a picture of a Tony, Kawasaki 61. He was standing right beside it in pilot's uniform. He said, "That's me. And I got shot down." "You did?" He said, "Yeah, 3 Corsairs attacked us." And he told me about being in the water and all of that stuff that went with it. And I said, "Well, now I'm curious." I said, "When was that?" He said, "Well, we were about 100 miles north of Okinawa, and these 3 airplanes showed up." And I said, "Hold it just a minute. When was this?" He said, "It was April the 28th. April the 28th. He said, "Yes, they shot so many planes down, and I was made a prisoner." And I went check my logbooks later. It was the man I shot down in the Tony. Same guy, same time. He confirmed that by saying it was 10 o'clock in the morning, which it surely was. I was very lucky.
Amazing, sir.
It was a mean war.
Do you think that the training that you received in flight school and then at the replenishment squadron in the F4U, did that prepare you well enough for the combat that you were going to see?
No. Combat is always different. It's a different war, different time, different place, and sometimes different people. Without making a long story of it, my next war was Korea. I did 2 tours. In the first tour, I was flying the Corsair, but flying it at night, supporting our troops, illuminating the battlefield with light. And the second one was I was flying jets and escorting B-29s up on the Yalu. In that scenario, we were fighting the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Russians, because the MiGs were up there after those 29s. I don't think anything could prepare you for that, because everything is different every time. Just had to be ready, believe in yourself, because you're always scared. Somebody asked me one time, "Are you scared?" I said, "You hell damn right I'm scared. All the time." Vietnam wasn't any better. What else?
Well, sir, we got an interesting question yesterday from one of the cadets over at Officer Training School. And they asked you if you ever had any survivor's guilt. And I thought your response yesterday was very enlightening, and I think the group here would appreciate hearing it.
Good question. Emotionally, when you get in the business of who's going to die first, and you are scared, but you have a duty to perform, and that's what you're trained for. I had no remorse about the young pilot that was trying to kill me, because I think in most cases I was better than he was, and I felt that way, and if I managed to shoot him down, it wasn't a hooray, I won, because there was always another one around to keep you busy. Unfortunately, in war, and I'll say this, women and children, families who are not engaged in the war are involved in it, whether they like it or not, and somebody up there is trying to kill them. When we raided Honshu, Kyushu, the islands of Japan, you could not help but kill a bunch of civilians. What's even worse, when you come back, you have film showing what you shot, who you shot, and how you did it, and you reviewed your films for official purposes. I have never forgotten that. I still dream about it today, and I'm 94 years old. It's just tough business. And this is where the training that I see you giving your people here, they become dedicated to their job, the protection of the United States, regardless of politics. And you cannot have remorse bothering what you do, but you still know it's there and it stays with you a long time. No fun at all. Yes, sir?
Sir, and to illustrate how dangerous this is, in Austin, you told me a story about how they strapped on napalm bombs onto the dive bombers, and they had affixed some sort of wooden fin system that was preventing the flaps from fully extending. And how...
Well, that was an incident on the carrier. The folks directing the aircraft on your carrier deck at first were not very experienced with the Corsair, which, like all fighter planes that I know of, had flaps that came down to help you take off on a short distance. And someone decided we would use a napalm, which is a firebomb, and instead of putting a gasoline tank on the center portion of the fuselage, they put these firebombs there, and when the flaps came down, one would come down not all the way and the other one did. It made a very precarious takeoff situation. In fact, if you had a short deck to take off from, you went in the water, then that bomb exploded when you hit the water. We lost quite a few before they figured out what to do about it, but they did. I lost some good friends that way.
Yes, sir. I thought it was interesting, after your missions, how you would find the boat again. If you would enlighten this crowd on how precise of a method you guys used to recover back aboard Mom.
In flight training, we learned to navigate an airplane with one pilot, either for a dive bomber or a fighter pilot, by using a chartboard. And when we were getting ready to take off from the carrier, we would plot the position of the carrier on that chartboard. In those days, we had no electronics that were available to find the carrier after we took off. That became very interesting when you were 1,000 miles from anywhere, or you didn't want to land in enemy territory, was to find that carrier when you got through with your mission. And oftentimes the carrier was not where they said they were going to be. They had to maneuver in another way. So we did what we called a square search. Very simple affair for us simple fellows flying. You fly one direction for 15 minutes. You do a 90-degree turn to the left or right, and you start doing a square and expanding the square each time you went around. And sure enough, you'd find them most of the time. I was with a squadron in peacetime the whole squadron got lost, and I was the division leader, and our leader had not learned the lessons of navigation, so he asked me if I could find the carrier. It took an hour, but that's all the fuel we had, and sure enough, I found it during the square search. We now have electronics where you know where everybody is all the time. But that was a long time ago, folks. Yes, sir.
On May 11th of 1945, you had been grounded for doing your job too well. Could you talk to us about that day and the impact it has had for the rest of your Marine career?
I was stationed on the USS Bunker Hill, which was the largest of the carriers that we had out there. And that was the one that was kamikaze. Believe it or not, we had a flight officer who was so jealous of the fact that his competitors, the other pilots, would run into a fight and he couldn't. He just couldn't shoot down an airplane because he wasn't there at the right time at the right place. Well, I had quite a bit of luck. I shot down 15, but I was only credited with, the Marine Corps credited me with 10, that's all. This guy, the flight officer, grounded me and made me the duty officer for 1 week. He said, give me a chance. Well, I was a duty officer when the kamikaze hit. I was 3 decks down. We had just secured from general quarters where everyone had to wear a gas mask during general quarters, which was preparing for combat or an attack. So the ship immediately filled full of smoke because the large ventilators of that day, since we had no air conditioning, pulled all the smoke from the shattered aircraft and oil tanks and whatever, pulled all that smoke into the ship's interior immediately. Figures have been used on how many deaths there were. For me to get out, I crawled on my hands and knees for 5 minutes with my gas mask on because I had not taken it off. And I crawled over bodies to get to fresh air. We lost over 800. The Navy likes to say 372. Is that what you wanted?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the part about emerging, getting out from the below the decks, when you were struggling up the ladder, if you could explain to the crowd how you actually got up onto the flight deck.
I could do that. It's kind of a long story. I was actually in the officers' mess having a cup of coffee, which is 3 decks below the flight deck, because we had secured from general quarters. When the 2 kamikazes hit us, it was just 2 huge explosions. Everything went black. So I had my wingman with me, by the way. He was also grounded. We got on our hands and knees and we crawled on the floor, feeling our way until we found the door of the mess hall. By that time, the aisle was full of bodies. We had to climb up over them. And we continued crawling until we found a ladder that went up to the next deck. We got to the top of the ladder. Somebody had closed the door to that hallway and bolted it down. That was some of the fire control, I think. I found a metal battle lantern hanging on the wall. Mind you, I couldn't see, just feeling. And I started banging on that door. It was a steel door. And I thought we were gone because everybody behind me was dead. By the grace of God, somebody heard the banging and opened it. And I and my wingman escaped. Everybody else remained down there. We were very lucky. The good Lord had watched over me ever since I was a little kid, so I know that.
Yeah, we talked about your great guardian angels you've got on your shoulders, sir.
Say again?
We talked about your guardian angels you've got on your shoulders.
I have had a guardian angel. I've had my crashes and bailouts, but I survived. And there's only one way that could happen, is to have a guardian angel. And I can say to anybody here, Muslim, Jewish, whoever, it helps a lot to believe in God. But you really don't realize it until you get older and have experiences like that. And it helps to know that somebody's behind you.
Sir. We talked in Austin about what this extreme level of violence will do to you, and it was about the time when you were headed to Corpus to replace a couple slots on the Blue Angels team. You mentioned to me how callous you felt you'd gotten, and after your experiences in World War II. You could talk to us a little bit about that.
Say that again.
Sir, you talked to us about how callous you felt you had gotten towards the value of human life when you had to go down to Corpus and replace a member on the Blue Angels team.
Well, I had forgotten I had told you that. This gentleman visited me and my wife in our home to tell me all about you folks. And he did a good job. But I did tell him something I rarely have mentioned to anybody. Flying from 1941 until 1954, that's 2 wars, I became so callous that I'd lost all my friends, all of them. Our squadron 221, we lost 16 pilots out of that group of 30. Korean War lost everybody that ever got airborne, it seemed like. And I felt it very severely. Yet I still had a job to do. So by that time, my mentality was not the old boy Caswell was. It was something else. Actually a dangerous mental condition. I didn't give a you-know-what about anything, which is a terrible way to live. And that's when I joined the Blue Angels. Well, a member of that outfit, which was a good one, I was hit by a drunk driver and I spent 1.5 years in the hospital. This leg was torn off completely. And I had a chance to recover. I thought about it a whole lot. I had to do something to me while I was hopefully getting well, and it worked. Mind control, if you want to call it that. To believe in people again and not be so callous about life. And combat will do that to you. And we see young people now coming back from battle that don't recover from that right away. So it's something to be dealt with if you're still alive. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Over the course of 3 wars, could you talk to us a little bit from your experience how the way we fight from the air changed over those 3 wars? How the way we fought the war in the air over those 3 wars changed for the better or worse?
Well, it changed drastically. World War I, of course, the dogfighting started, and that's where that word came from. In World War II, we were still dogfighting. It was one-on-one. And the best man won, at least we think so. Once we moved into the jet age, our maneuvering took on the aspects of covering a large amount of airspace. Rather than one-on-one, you could fire from a long distance away with a missile. And by Vietnam, you could be 20 miles from your victim and you can still pop him. I enjoyed the F-8 Crusader because it changed the dogfighting, if you want to use that term for that, into vertical combat. You could go up, you could go down, where in World War I and World War II, it was all horizontal. Does that answer that
yes,
question?
Sir. Thank you.
Okay. I still haven't figured out which was up or down, but that's all right.
Of all the aircraft that you have flown, what's been your favorite? Your favorite aircraft that you've flown, sir?
Bad question. With civilian aircraft and military, I've flown with 56 different kinds of airplanes, about 10,000 hours worth. Each airplane is designed to do a specific job in most cases. Certainly in the military, that's true. So it's very difficult to compare one to the other. Actually, I like the old biplane made by Boeing, the N2S. We called it the Yellow Peril. I liked them all. Some of them scared me to death, but that's all right.
So your dedication to your country is moving, but your dedication to your family is more so. Could you speak to what your family has meant to you to last 30-year career in the United States Marine Corps?
Now you're getting real personal. I had a very, very fine career in the Marine Corps, and it was fraught with all kinds of fears and danger. I guess you could say I enjoyed most of it. I sometimes wondered in later years why I had been spared in the manner that I did, because most of the people that I knew and really liked, they didn't make it. And some of them, of course, died early from just old age. But I think I figured it out. The good Lord wanted me here to raise my family. I had 7 children. I lost one. I lost my wife. But that family is the reason I'm still here today, because I think I'm here for them, to be with them and help them where I can. I found out very early that I tried to teach them a lot of things that by the time they were 11 years old, they thought they were grown up. Does that answer that? It's a very poor question.
Yes, sir. See if I can come up with some other bad ones. How about this? So this group, in a very short time, will go off to lead airmen, soldiers, sailors, and Marines. Do you have any leadership advice for them to do a good job?
I guess a very simple one. Believe in your country. Defend your country, regardless of politics. Let's follow that Constitution. And with that kind of guidance, I think things will turn out pretty good. Not without a fight. Believe in yourself. Bring the good Lord into it if you'd like. Work hard. Be trustworthy. And go back to the Boy Scout oath if you want to. There's nothing easy. And believe in your fellow man. That's what I saw yesterday. These young people that aspired to be officers. That was thrilling to me. I like that. Young people headed in the right direction. You've really got something here, folks. I'm impressed. Don't screw it up.
I think we're impressed with you, sir. More so. Is there anything else you'd like to share with this group today?
Say again?
Is there anything else you'd like to share with this group today?
Just keep at it, folks. You'll get there. One foot in front of the other. When you fall down, you get up and do it again. Believe in God. Thank you very much.